All right, so my name is Nicholas Wilkinson, and I did my paper on Australian disaster management. Um, this right here is the country of Australia, which is also a continent. It is surrounded by water on all sides, which makes it very susceptible to cyclones and tsunamis. It has a very diverse climate. So, as far as the rationale and the history of disaster management goes, disaster management in Australia is really thanks to the Red Cross, which came into the country in 1918 to handle the outbreak of the Spanish flu after World War One. Um, after that, the Red Cross decided to remain in Australia um, because they saw how many types of disasters that the nation had to put up with. And finally, in 1970, Australia finally had its first national push for disaster management, and they formed the National Disasters Organization. And because of the Red Cross's heavy involvement in the past 6 or 7 decades before that in the country, um, Australian disaster management really focused on response and recovery, and they hadn't quite made it to the mitigation and preparation stage for disasters, which that was to come, a little later in their development. But at first, they really focused on, after a disaster happened. Um, but as far as types of disasters and the plans that came from these disasters, um, you know, Australia really has to deal with bushfires and cyclones. They have bad bushfires every year, such as the New South Wales bushfire that took out 200 homes. Also, they deal with 10 to 13 cyclones a year, as they're surrounded by water on all sides. The nation must also deal with landslides, earthquakes, tsunamis, hailstorms, and of course, they deal with the occasional man made disaster, just like any developed nation does. As far as disasters go that really shape disaster management in Australia, um, when it comes to natural disasters, Australia doesn't have a specific disaster that really shaped how they developed as a country. It's really the quantity that they have to deal with. They face 10 to 13 cyclones a year. They face bushfires every year, landslides. So it's really just they saw how much they had to deal with every year, and they made their implementation or their policies from that. But one disaster that really did shape disaster management in Australia was 9/11, um, when the world really saw that terrorism can affect a nation. And that put the Emergency Management Australia, which was formerly the National Disasters Organization, under the Attorney General's office and immediately put 4 new policies into effect. As far as the implementation pattern of Australian disaster management, it's a lot like the United States, where it's a bottom up pattern where it starts with the local and state governments and then goes up to the national governments. The local and state governments can request funds from the national governments during disaster times. When it comes to the participants, it's mainly government, both local and national. As I said, it starts with the local government and moves up to the national government as time moves on. Um, the local government can also request for physical assistance, which mainly comes from the military. And 2 other participants that Australian disaster management relies on are volunteers and non governmental organizations, such as the Red Cross, which is how they got their start in the country. And since Australia is such a vast nation, their volunteers really do come in handy and are a necessity. As far as obstacles for disaster management go, they have 2 main obstacles they have to face, um, and that is they have poor coordination with NGOs at the moment, which is surprising because they got their start with the Red Cross. And the second that is that because the EMA is under so many responsibilities, the chain of command has gotten unclear at some times. And these are the references that I've used. Thank you to these for helping me learn a lot about Australian disaster management.